So as Sonia said, I'm Niamh Casey. I'm an authoring expert here at Learnosity. And in today's webinar, we're going to look at how to set up dynamic content on an item. We'll also look at how to insert that content into a question. And as I do this, you'll see how to add not only text, but also images and LaTeX as dynamic content too. So you'll be able to use dynamic content with math questions, for example. So before I get started and show you how to set up dynamic content on an item in the authoring tool, I'll just want to clarify exactly what I am talking about when I say dynamic content. So dynamic content is a feature we have in Learnosity, which allows you, the author, to configure multiple variations of the same question. And you do this by using variables. So you set up a data table on an item, and then you go and create questions in that item, and you insert variables into those questions. And those variables represent different pieces of data, and that's how it works. So I'll just look at a really basic example. If you had a question like, James had 15 apples, if 2 apples were eaten, how many apples does James have left? In this case, the name James could be a variable and the number of apples that he has could also be a variable. So we've called those variables name and number. So if you think about this and how it's represented in Learnosity, we would set this up on an item as a table, and each column would represent a different variable. So the first column would be called name, and it would contain all of the data that related to the name variable. So like on this slide, you can see we have a table. We have the first column called name, which is the name variable, and we have all of the data associated with it. So we have 6 names. It's the same for the number variable, and it's the same for the result variable. One really important thing to remember with this dynamic content is that each row in the table will always appear together in a question. So Jack, if that's pulled out to display in the question, he'll always have 5 apples, the result will always be 3. Same with Fiona, she'll always have 3 apples, the result will always be 1, and so on. So you'll never end up in a situation where it pulls out, James, and he has 3 apples and the result is 19. So the rows will always appear together in the question. So now I'm going to go into the authoring tool. I'm just going to use the author site for this. So I'm going to go into an empty item, and I'm going to go to my settings. And in here, I have a data table option. And this data table is where I'm going to input my dynamic content. So you might not have this option available to you if you look for it. It has to be turned on in some organizations. So if you're using the author site, you can just email us or log a ticket and we can enable that for you. If you're using any other system to author in Learnosity that's not the author site, you'll just need to contact your organization's developers and they can turn it on for you. It's a really, really simple thing to do. So I'm just going to go and my data table. I'm going to go to a spreadsheet now and paste in my data. You can input it manually yourself just by typing in the field, but it's just not the tidiest, it's not the easiest to make out, particularly if you have a lot of data. So I'm going to go to a spreadsheet, which I've created. This is just Google Sheets, and I can just copy and paste this data in. So you'll see in here, I have a variable name at the top of each column. So I have country, I have correct flag, flag 1, and flag 2. So the country variable is just a bunch of different countries. So in this question, I'm going to ask the student to select a particular flag for a specific country. So I have countries in the correct flag column. I have all of the correct answers. So it's really, really important that you give your correct answer variable an identifiable name so that when you're authoring, you know which variable is the correct answer. Because when you're in the question editor, all you see are the variable names. You don't see any other information. So you need to have an identifiable name on your variable. So I have correct flag here, and then I flag 1 and flag 2 for my other response options. So I have a mixture of text and images in this table. So obviously text is just literally just typing into the field. It's fine, you don't need to do anything special there. With the images, I have an image URL, but I also have it enclosed within HTML image tags. And it's really important you do that, because if you don't and you just put in the URL, when you display your question, it will just display the URL in the question. It won't display the actual image. So if you think about it, say a response option field in a multiple choice question is a rich text field. If you click into it, you have a rich text editor. If you look in the source, you have HTML. So you need to put this in HTML too, so that the rich text editor knows what to do with it. So that's why we have it enclosed in HTML. And you'll also notice there's a comma in between each variable name and also in between each piece of data. And that's so that the dynamic content feature is able to tell, where a variable ends and a new one begins, and where a piece of data ends and a new one begins. So it's just so that you can separate out the different columns and it knows what is what. So I'm going to copy this now, and I'm going to go back to my my data table, and I'm going to paste this in. And if I hit continue, it'll format it into a table like it was in my spreadsheet for me. I can edit it at this point if I want to. I can clear it up here with reset, or if I click apply, I can save it. And you can always edit this at any time. You don't have just one opportunity to edit this now. So I'll just click apply, and I can see now that's been configured on my item. If I go back up to it, I can see it's here. But nothing else has happened because I haven't put it into a question yet. So I'm going to do that now. So if I go into add new, I'm going to just select my multiple choice question, as I mentioned. And I'm going to start typing my question. So I'll say select the, and I want to insert a variable now. So what I do is I go to my rich text toolbar. I have a data drop down now, and this only appears in your toolbar when you have a data table configured on your item, just like we did there. And if I click on that, I can see all my different variables. So I'm just going to click on the one I want and keep typing. In my response options, then I'm going to do the very same thing. I'm going to remove what's there, and I'm going to just insert my different variables. Okay, and as you can see, like I said, all you can see are the variable names. We can't see any images or anything else. I'm just going to delete this last field, and I'm going to set my correct answer. Now, bear in mind as well that in this case, the correct answer is always going to be the first response option. So you can just turn on shuffle options, and that will stop that being an issue. It'll just appear in a random, the response options will appear in a random order. Now, if I hit preview, I can actually see an example of a row from my data table. So I select the Croatian flag from the list below. So if I hit select, I can see that's correct. And if you want to check every row in your data table, you can, just to make sure it's all correct, it's rendering properly, the correct answers match up with the actual correct answers. So in the top right corner, we have a left and a right arrow. And this again only appears once you have a data table configured on your item. So I can navigate right, and I can go and view every single row in my table. And now I'm at the end, so I can't go forward anymore, but I can go back. So anywhere really in the authoring tool that you see this container symbol here between the two arrows usually indicates dynamic content. So you saw it on the data drop down, you'll see it here, and you'll also see it on the math keypad when you want to include dynamic content in your math. So I'm just going to save this now, and I can see on my item edit page, I can see my variable names again. And if I select preview, I can see an example of a row from my data table. I can't filter through the different rows in the table like I could in the question editor. So the question editor is the only place where you can actually look through each row in your table and test it. This will just pull out a random row from your table. And that's it, really, really simple. So now I'm going to go back and do the same thing, but with math. So I'm going to go in and create a new item. I'm going to go to my settings and my data table. So math is a little bit different. I'm going to go, I have a spreadsheet as well. I'm going to copy and paste. So with this spreadsheet, I have an expression variable and I have a result variable. The thing with math is you obviously enter the math in as LaTeX, so you need to enter it in LaTeX markup. If you're not overly familiar with LaTeX, there's a lot of information online, but we do have on our doc site, we have a page on how to use LaTeX in the author guide, and it tells you all the markup for all the different symbols that we have in the keypad. So if I go back to my spreadsheet, you need to bear in mind with math where it is in the question editor you want to display the math. So For example, if you want to display in a math-only field, a math-only field would be the validation area of a math question, for example, or the template area of a math question. So somewhere that when you click into the field, all you see is the math keypad. So let me just see, this is a math question. So a math-only area would be this template area. I've no rich text toolbar, I've no access to a source code, there's no HTML, this is a LaTeX only area. And the same with the validation area, it's the very same. So with these, I can just enter in my my LaTeX data in the table as is, just as regular LaTeX. I don't have to do anything special to it because the math engine will read it in and say, yep, this is LaTeX, let's display it, and it's absolutely fine. With the expression variable in my table, I want to display that in the question stimulus, and the question stimulus, if we look up here in this example, is a rich text field. So it's got a rich text toolbar. The source, if we have some content in this field, if we looked at the source, we'd have HTML in it. So if you think about it, the Learnosity question editor doesn't know what to do if I just put in, for example, on row 2 here, 15 plus 10x. It doesn't know that I want to render that as LaTeX. How would it? It'll just render it as regular text. So in order to tell the Learnosity text editor that I want to render this as LaTeX, I have to include a backslash and an open bracket at the beginning of my LaTeX expression. And then I have to put a backslash and a close bracket at the end of my LaTeX expression. And that's the only thing you need to do. It's the only extra bit of work you'd have to do. So for example, if you had a multiple choice question and you just wanted to have LaTeX in the stem and also in the response options, you'd have to set everything up like this with the backslash, the open bracket, the LaTeX expression, the backslash and the close bracket. So the LaTeX expression itself doesn't change. You don't have to do anything to that. It's just the beginning and end that you have to add the slash and the brackets to. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this in and go back to my table, paste it in, hit continue, and I can see it formats for me. So then I'll click apply, and that's done. So I'm going to go into a math formula question now and add this in. So I'm going to say factorize following expression. And again, in my rich text toolbar, I have my data drop down again. So I'm going to pop in expression, that variable. I'm going to leave my template blank, and then I want to set my correct answer. So I'll choose the scoring method I want to use. In this case, I'm going to just say equiliteral and ignore order. And then if I click into my value field, I have, again, this container, which is telling me this is something to do with dynamic content. So if I select it, I see a drop down showing my two variables, expression and result. So I'm going to pop in result here. And now if I go to my preview area, I can see my first random row from my table, 15 plus 10x. And if I hit show answer, it'll show me the answer, 5. And that's correct. And I can do that again for each row in my table. And that's it, really, really simple. So I'm going to finish that up today. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to email me, niamh.casey@learnosity.com. You can also log a support ticket or just email your support email address, and we'll be happy to follow up if you need any extra clarification or if there was anything you weren't sure of. Okay, and we'll email the recording to all registrants in the next few days as well. Thank you.
Thank you.